We begin today in Europe, where a national lockdown has gone into effect in Austria. This is in addition to restrictions in other countries, such as in the Netherlands and Belgium, to control rising case numbers, primarily to do with lower than expected vaccination figures. But these restrictions have prompted protests and in some cases violence, such as in Belgium, where police clashed with protesters on Sunday. There is anger over the government's advice to get vaccinated and any possible moves to impose mandatory vaccinations, as Austria has done. Similar scenes were reported in the Netherlands, which saw a third straight night of violence. Now, getting people to agree to vaccinate themselves has been hard. Vaccination figures vary across Europe from 67% in Germany to a little over 81% in Portugal. And people have varying reasons for not wanting to vaccinate against COVID-19.
We want our freedom, and being injected by something that's not tested well, being not able to work where you want to work, to be where you want to be, that's not where we stand for. That's not freedom, that's not where we live. We live in West Europe, and we just want to be free like we were before.
They're young people, and they've had little freedom for almost 2 years now because of COVID-19. So yes, I understand in a way, but I don't approve.
To make a point, to stand for our freedom and to demand for more open communication from the government and to the civilians, from the politicians especially, from the scientists, that they make clear stances and be clear and fair with us, and also respect our opinion, which is some of us, we don't want to get vaccinated.
We're being put under pressure now, and ultimately, we're no longer free. I'll submit to the pressure, but honestly, I'm convinced mandatory vaccination is coming.
So while many in Europe believe their freedoms are compromised through vaccination, in most places in Asia, it's just the opposite. Many believe vaccination is the key to their freedom, which is why some nations in the region rank among the world's best when it comes to vaccination rates. Countries like Japan, Cambodia, and Malaysia have also started reopening, even as Europe starts to reclose.
Remember back to when the Tokyo Olympic Games were about to open, and some Japanese were out on the streets saying, "Cancel the Summer Games." COVID-19 rates were skyrocketing in Japan, and vaccination numbers were low. Fast forward to late autumn, Japan's vaccination rate has finally taken off. Vaccination is voluntary in Japan, so I think it's a big thing that people go to the vaccination site because they want to receive it. The inoculation completion rate has reached about 80%, and I think that's the reason why. By the end of the year, Japan should be near 85% vaccinated, with bonus points for an extraordinary percentage of people wearing masks compared to much of the rest of the world. This summer, Malaysia and Indonesia were battling some of the highest COVID-19 caseloads as the Delta variant tore through the region. Both have managed to stem the surge, with Malaysia now claiming 76% of its population fully vaccinated.
Obviously, it's a lot of improvement.
A lot of improvement in Cambodia as well, one of the poorer countries in the region. But it's keeping up thanks to vaccine procurement, its efforts to counter misinformation, and a general okay with old and young getting the jab.
I brought her to get vaccinated today because I want my daughter to be free from COVID. Also, she'll be attending school soon. She shouldn't give it to her classmates, nor they to her.
Some nations continue to struggle. India may have hit the billion vaccination mark, but it's only 29% fully inoculated among adults. Taiwan is well under 50%, but the island now has upped its game on vaccine procurement and expects to see those numbers rise in the coming months.
And joining me now for more are journalists Michael Penn in Tokyo and Joyce Lee from DW's East Asia Bureau in Taipei. Welcome to you both. Michael, to you first. Now, Japan was a slow starter when it came to vaccinations, but the picture is very different now. Why?
Well, I think this is really attributable to the sort of Japanese decision-making process and just kind of the behavior of Japanese bureaucracies in general. Oftentimes, they're very slow to make decisions. This is hardly unusual. To feel secure about something, to establish procedures, to get everybody to kind of agree to how to do something. And that often takes a lot longer than it would take in most other countries. But on the other hand, what Japanese do very well is after all the decisions have been made, after all the buy-in is there, implementation is then smooth and methodical. And that's really what we've seen with the vaccinations in Japan. Slow start, but then after that, just chugga, 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 straight through to where we are now.
What about the buy-in from the citizenry? Is that something that has helped in the process?
Certainly. Unlike, I guess, a lot of other places, the whole vaccination issue, whether or not to be vaccinated, isn't really a political issue here. There's no culture war divide about, as there is in some countries between, let's say, people on the left and people on the right about whether or not to get vaccinated or not. It just isn't politicized. I think most Japanese kind of have a general trust of the medical profession, and so they're willing to go along with it. Maybe they didn't want to be the first ones to get vaccinated, but once they saw that other people were getting vaccinated and they were okay to go and get vaccinated themselves.
Joyce, to you in Taipei, now the Taiwanese were also hesitant to vaccinate themselves, especially in the summer. What's the situation now?
Well, almost 50% of the population are fully vaccinated now, and that's a huge leap compared to what happened in the summer. Before the major outbreak happened in May, people were very hesitant and they were very concerned about the side effects of the vaccines, especially when there was simply almost no COVID in Taiwan at that time. So people didn't feel the urgency to get vaccinated. And even the government, the authorities said that there was no hurry to purchase vaccines because the containment of the virus had been so successful at that time. But after the major outbreak in May, people were very scared of getting infected, and they started to want to get vaccinated and desperate for vaccines. So the number is going up now, and the supply of vaccines is also getting better now.
Talk to us a bit about the role of the government here in trying to convince people to get vaccinated. And the reason I ask this is because here in Europe, at least, governments have been unable to convince large numbers of people to follow restrictions or, for that matter, get themselves vaccinated.
Well, it's not that hard for the government to convince people to follow the rules and the restrictions because we should not ignore the cultural nuance. Here in Taiwan or in Chinese society, there's a saying that goes, sacrifice oneself for the greater good for the society. So it's a collectivist society here in Taiwan, and people are more willing to sacrifice their freedom or their interests in order to protect the people around them. And bear in mind that Taiwanese experienced the SARS outbreak in 2003. So wearing a mask was very taken for granted. Even before the mask mandate, Taiwanese people were rushing to convenience stores to get their masks to protect themselves and the people around them. And not wearing a mask is like not wearing pants in public nowadays. So, and there's a peer pressure in Taiwan that if you don't follow what the majority people do, you kind of get weird looks from others. So this is the cultural side of what we're facing here in Taiwan.
Michael, to you in Tokyo, Joyce was just talking about the cultural nuance, essentially the shame almost. If you're not wearing a mask, it's akin to not wearing pants. I mean, is that something that one could apply to Japan as well, which would sort of explain why Japan has been able to control COVID-19 much better, particularly after the Olympics?
Yeah, almost everything Joyce said there applies with almost equal force with Japan. The culture believes in cooperation and doing things for the community, much as she outlined in Taiwan. Maybe the only two differences would be that we didn't have the SARS outbreak here, so there wasn't that, and also that there was also not really a lull in the COVID outbreak. We have had 5 waves here in Japan, which have been pretty consistent. So whereas she said Taiwan is about 50% vaccinated, here in Japan we're close to 80% vaccinated. I think it's perhaps the highest rate among G7 or G countries as far as I know. But anyway, it's gone forward steadily. And it continues. I mean, even though the rates of daily vaccinations is down, that's probably just because we're getting to the parts of the population where very few people need to be vaccinated. Among 65 and olders, it's 92% of the Japanese population is now vaccinated.
I mean, numbers that people in Europe will only be jealous of. I have to ask you, Michael, we don't have much time left, but how do people in Japan view what's happening in Europe in terms of the protests and the violence that one is seeing against government measures and restrictions?
Well, honestly, I imagine most Japanese kind of shrug at it and kind of say, well, there's foreigners being violent again. I mean, there's kind of this feeling in Japan that overseas people, make trouble and make hassles over things that they don't really need to make hassles over. So I think they probably look at it and say, yeah, those are the foreigners. That's what they do. Good thing we don't have that here.
Journalist Michael Penn in Tokyo and DW correspondent Joyce Lee in Taipei. Thanks very much, both of you, for joining us today.